There are strong rumours circulating that the Rolex GMT-Master II Pepsi may have been discontinued, and if that's true, speculation immediately shifts to one question. Is the Coke coming back? I own the Pepsi, I've lived with it, I understand the psychology of this watch. And today I want to take a measured look at what discontinuation would actually mean. Not for hype channels, not for flippers, but for real watch collectors and for the people still sitting on waiting lists. Because the reality is almost always more nuanced than the noise. Welcome back to HoroLogical. First, clarity. Rolex rarely announces discontinuations in a dramatic fashion. It doesn't issue farewell press releases. It happens quietly. Production slows, allocations stop, dealer websites quietly update, and the community connects the dots. So when people say the Pepsi is discontinued, what they usually mean is authorised dealers are no longer receiving allocations. That is very different from Rolex issuing an official statement. The watch in question is the GMT-Master II 126710 BLRO Blue Rouge, the red and blue Cerachrom bezel model. If production has stopped, this wouldn't be unprecedented. Rolex rotates colourways, we know that. It has always rotated colourways, but here's the part that people underestimate. Rolex does not make decisions reactively, they think in decades. There's also something more symbolic happening. If the Pepsi exits and the Coke returns, the infamous RONR Rouge Noir, black and red, the GMT Master II effectively takes a leap from the cockpit back to the boardroom. The Pepsi is aviation mythology, Pan Am pilots, transatlantic travel, tool watch heritage, but the Coke, black and red, that was a colourway often associated with executive presence. The GMT is a power object rather than a pilot's instrument. So if this shift happens, it isn't just a bezel change, it's a further tonal change for the whole brand itself. The GMT becomes darker, more corporate, less cockpit seat, more boardroom table. There's also another potential move at play here, but I'm going to save that for the summary of this video. Rolex understands symbolism better than almost any other brand on earth. This follows brand direction over decades now, so let's address the practical question. What happens to people waiting? First of all, there is no global Rolex waiting list. You are not in line with Geneva. You are on an internal interest list at a retail partner. If Pepsi is discontinued, one of four things happen. One, your dealer's going to tell you production has stopped, end of the story. Two, you are perhaps offered an alternative, Batman, Sprite, maybe something else from the range. Three, if you are deeply embedded with your AD, you might receive one of the final allocations of the Pepsi. And four, you could also be first in line for a Coke, but that would require serious spend history and future intent to the brand pledged. There is no compensation, there is no grievance, there is no entitlement, just market reality. And here's something interesting. For many collectors, discontinuation ends a psychological chase. The tension dissolves. You either pivot, pay secondary prices, or you move on. And sometimes moving on is the healthiest option. This is where hype channels lose discipline. Discontinued does not automatically equal permanent price explosion. What usually happens is a short-term interest spike. Grey dealers will test higher prices, speculators pile in hard, and then you get stabilisation, because value is not created by absence alone, it's created by sustained demand. If the Coke launches, demand doesn't disappear, it redistributes. Markets don't panic long term, they rebalance. Now here's where this gets really interesting. When Rolex launched the Land Dweller, they entrusted early hands-on access to Teddy Baldessar, and since that launch, Teddy's brand has grown exponentially. He now operates with a large professional production team, high-end cinematography, scripting, lighting, post-production, the complete studio package. If Rolex were to launch something like a Coke GMT, one of the big three sports references, Daytona, Submariner, GMT-Master II, they would need scale, they would also need polish, they would need a safe pair of hands, and Teddy is the only YouTuber to have officially launched a Rolex watch to date. Last year, he and a small entourage attended Watches and Wonders. They're likely to repeat that whistle-stop tour again this year. Now remember, when the Land Dweller launched, Teddy had hands-on nearly a fortnight before Watches and Wonders, and that matters because a launch at that scale, it isn't filmed and produced overnight. There is brand sign-off involved, there is back and forth negotiation, there are compliance approvals, all under the tightest of security embargo conditions. And here's the key: if Rolex moves at a glacial pace, which we know they do, then the move from Land Dweller to a Coke GMT, it's not a leap. To Rolex, it's the blink of an eye. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, the Pepsi Cerachrom bezel. Rolex never fully resolved the production complexity of the red and blue ceramic bezel. The underlying challenge is chemistry. Extremely narrow variables during the firing process. You're baking red into ceramic, then chemically transforming half of it to blue. Attrition rates have reportedly been high and expensive. Early 126710 BLRO examples have even developed fading tendencies. Collectible? Absolutely yes, but not ideal from a manufacturing standpoint. The Pepsi bezel has never been scaled to the level that Rolex wanted, and it has been close to the chopping block for years now. Compare that with the red and black. Red and black is a far more straightforward ceramic production process. It has been tested subtly on a Daytona already. It's more predictable, more scalable, and Rolex has now had years of R&D time since the Pepsi issues first appeared. So what this potentially signals is consolidation. Blue has been the technical outlier in the GMT range. If Coke arrives, production becomes more stable, cleaner, more controlled, and Rolex always favours control. Now here's a question: if there is any doubt whatsoever about initial production scale, does Rolex launch the Coke in white gold first, then follow with steel? 1 or maybe even 2 years later. They've done this before. They test demand, control the rollout, and they create tier separation. And then there's bracelet configuration, polished centre link Oyster, 5-link Jubilee, both on the launch. These are not small decisions, they are strategic decisions. Now, personal reflection, I own the Pepsi. If it's discontinued tomorrow, my ownership experience, it doesn't change. The bezel is still red and blue, the movement is still robust, the engineering remains identical. Discontinuation does not add quality, it does not remove quality, it only changes availability at the AD. And collectors often confuse availability with intrinsic value. They are not the same thing. Even if you are not in the market for a Rolex, this matters, because when Rolex moves, the entire industry ripples. Microbrands react, secondary markets shift, often quickly, and colour trends cascade through the whole industry. Collectors reevaluate allocations. If the Coke launches, it could be the biggest Rolex professional sports release in recent years. We've lit this taper before, and it's fizzled out. But with the BLRO quietly disappearing from individual AD websites, this might finally be the year. For those still waiting, you're not losing something, you're watching a cycle turn. For those who own one, nothing about your watch changed overnight. And for those speculating about the Coke, This isn't about a bezel, it's about how the most powerful watch brand in the world manages scarcity without ever admitting that that's exactly what they're doing. The Rolex GMT-Master II, reference 16760, the first Coke bezel GMT, was also the first model in the line to feature a truly independent adjustable local hour hand. Powered by the Calibre 3085, it marked the transition from the original GMT Master architecture to the fully fledged GMT Master II system that we recognise today. How poignant would it be if a modern re-release of the Coke at Watches and Wonders also marked another architectural shift, becoming the first GMT Master II housed in a 41mm case. The 16760 redefined the movement. A 41mm Coke would redefine the case. Rolex has a habit of embedding technical milestones inside aesthetic updates. If history were to rhyme with that, the Coke would once again become the vehicle for change, rather than merely a nostalgic colourway. If you found this video useful, consider subscribing, give us a like, leave a comment. I'll link to a couple of previous Rolex videos that I've produced on topics discussed here in this video. And remember, watch collecting isn't logical, but it is horological.